spent 31 years as a school principal. I learned early that the most dangerous situations were never the loud ones. The screaming matches in the hallway, the slammed lockers, the kids who cursed at teachers. Those were easy. You could see them coming. You could step in. It was the quiet ones that kept me up at night. The child who stopped eating lunch. The one who flinched when you touched their shoulder. The one who smiled too carefully, like smiling was something they had rehearsed. I never thought I would spend my retirement watching for those same signs in my own daughter. Her name is Cecile. She was born on a Tuesday in October, and she came into the world the same way she lived the first 26 years of her life. Loud, certain, taking up every inch of space she was given. She played soccer through college. She argued with me about everything from curfew to climate policy. She once drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to see a concert and called me from a ditch on the side of the road, laughing, asking if I could come get her. That was my daughter. I need you to hold on to that image of her because what I am about to tell you requires you to understand who she was before. The before matters. It always matters. She met him at a work conference in Atlanta. She was there representing her firm. She worked in urban planning, had just been promoted, and he was presenting a paper on infrastructure investment. She called me that same night, which she never did when she was traveling. "Mom," she said, "I just met the most interesting man." His name was Fletcher. Fletcher Dunn. He was 41, divorced once, no children. He had a good job, a downtown condo, a dog named Biscuit. He was tall and had one of those laughs that fills a room. On our first meeting, he brought me flowers, not roses, which would have been too much, but sunflowers, which felt exactly right. He asked about my career. He remembered details I mentioned only once and brought them up months later. He called Cecile brilliant in front of her face and meant it. I liked him. That is the part I have to live with. I liked him. They dated for 14 months. He proposed on a beach in North Carolina at a place her father and I used to take her as a child. He had called me to find out which beach. He had asked for my blessing on a Tuesday afternoon while Cecile was at a work lunch, and he sounded nervous in a way that seemed genuine. I said yes. I meant it. The wedding was in June. She wore her grandmother's earrings and cried during the vows, and not the pretty kind of crying. The real kind? The kind that scrunches your face and makes you laugh at yourself after. Fletcher cried too. I stood in the front row and thought, this is real. This is the good kind. I was wrong. I did not see it right away. That is a part no one tells you. People hear a story like this and they think, surely you noticed something. Surely there were signs. And there were. But they came slowly enough that each one seemed like a small thing. A single thread. You do not see the unraveling until you are holding a pile of string. The first thing I noticed was the phone calls. Cecile and I had always talked on Sundays. Not a rule, just something that had grown between us over years. She would call while she was doing laundry or driving back from the farmer's market, and we would talk for an hour about nothing in particular. After the wedding, the calls started getting shorter. Then they started getting postponed. Then sometimes she would call on a Tuesday and sound slightly out of breath, like she had stepped into another room quickly and was watching the clock. I told myself she was adjusting. Marriage is an adjustment. I had read enough books and counseled enough parents over the years to know that newlyweds needed space to build their life together. I gave her space. Then I noticed her appearance. Not anything dramatic. Just she stopped wearing her hair the way she had always worn it, this loose natural style she had kept since college. She started pressing it straight. When I mentioned it once, lightly, she said Fletcher preferred it that way. She said it like it was nothing. I nodded and said it looked nice. Then came Thanksgiving. They hosted that first year. Cecile had been excited about it for months. She texted me a picture of the table setting she was planning, sent me links to recipes she wanted to try. When my husband and I arrived, the table was set beautifully, but Cecile was moving through the kitchen with a kind of precise efficiency I had never seen in her before. Not relaxed cooking. Not the way she used to make a mess of every counter and laugh about it. She was focused in the way you focus when you are being observed. Fletcher sat in the living room with my husband while she finished cooking. At one point, I went to help her and she whispered, just barely, everything has to be right. I thought she meant the food. Later, I understood she meant something else. Dinner was fine, but at the table when my husband made a joke about her cooking, a gentle joke, the kind we had been making in our family for decades, I watched Cecile look at Fletcher before she laughed. Just a glance. Half a second. Checking. I filed that away. The calls kept getting shorter. She stopped talking about work, which had always been one of her favorite subjects. When I asked about her job, she said things were fine and then changed the subject. I learned later that Fletcher had started making comments about her career, that her hours were too long, that her male colleagues were too friendly, that a woman who traveled for work was a woman who was looking for something she was not finding at home. He had never said any of this directly, not in a way she could point to and call by its name. He said it sideways, in questions, in silences that lasted just a beat too long. That was the brilliance of it. By the time I really understood what was happening, Cecile had already been inside it for over a year. The change had been so gradual that she herself could not see it clearly. That is how it works. You do not put someone in a cage all at once. You build it around them one bar at a time, and you make each bar feel reasonable. The dinner that changed everything happened on a Saturday in March. Fletcher's mother, a woman named Suzanne, was visiting from Charleston. I had met Suzanne twice before and had never quite figured out how to read her. She was polished in the way that takes effort to maintain. She had opinions about everything and shared them all without ever seeming to notice the effect they had. We all went to a restaurant, a nice one, not formal but not casual either, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a wine list. Cecile had chosen it. Fletcher had questioned the choice twice on the way there, once about the parking and once about whether the menu had enough options for his mother. Cecile had answered both times in a voice that was smaller than her real voice. We were looking at the menu when Suzanne started talking about the food Cecile had cooked the last time she visited. She said it with a smile, which made it harder to respond to. She said the chicken had been a little dry. She said Cecile had probably used the wrong cut. She looked at Cecile while she said it the way you look at someone when you want them to agree with your assessment of themselves. Cecile said, "You're probably right." I looked at my daughter. She was not looking at me. She was looking at her menu with her shoulders slightly rounded and her jaw set just so. The way you hold your face when you are working very hard not to show anything. Fletcher said nothing. Suzanne moved on to another topic, satisfied. I set my menu down. A few minutes later, the bread arrived and Cecile reached for a piece. Fletcher looked at her. Not a long look, just a look. She put the bread back. She did it so quickly, so quietly, that I think she did not even realize she had done it. I excused myself. I went to the restroom and stood at the sink and ran cold water over my wrists and looked at my own face in the mirror. I had done this for 31 years with difficult situations at work. You do not make decisions when your chest is on fire. You breathe. You think. You decide what you are actually dealing with. I knew what I was dealing with. I went back to the table. I sat down. I picked up my menu again, and I smiled at Suzanne and I asked her about her garden in Charleston because I remembered she had one and people who are being charmed do not guard themselves as well. As we were leaving the restaurant, Fletcher and my husband walked ahead to get the cars from the ballet. Suzanne was behind them, and I walked beside Cecile. I took her hand. She looked at me, startled, the way you look when someone touches a bruise you did not know you had. I did not say anything then. I just held her hand until we got to the sidewalk. On the way home, my husband asked me what was wrong. I said I was tired. I was not tired. I was thinking. I had spent 31 years learning how to document things properly, how to build a case, how to make sure that when you finally acted, the action held. I had navigated school board politics, union disputes, state investigations. I knew how systems worked and, more importantly, I knew who in those systems actually had the power to do something. I did not call Cecile that night. I knew if I called her she would minimize it, because that is what people do when they have been slowly taught that their own perception cannot be trusted. I also knew that if Fletcher saw her on the phone with me for a long time, it would cost her. Instead, I started writing things down. Every conversation I had with Cecile after that, I wrote down what she said and what she did not say. Every time I visited and noticed something, the way she apologized when she had nothing to apologize for, the way she laughed at things that were not funny, the way she had started dressing more conservatively and had stopped seeing her college friends, I wrote it down. I kept a notebook in my bedside table. I dated every entry. I also called my nephew, who is a family law attorney in Charlotte, not to ask him to do anything, just to understand what I was looking at and what options existed and how these situations typically move through the legal system. He talked to me for 2 hours. He told me some things I already knew and several things I did not. Then I waited. Not because I was passive. Because I knew that if I moved too fast, before Cecile was ready, I could push her further in. I had seen it happen. I had read the research. People in these situations have to find their own way to the door, and what you can do, if you are patient and strategic and you do not let your fear make you reckless, is make sure the door is there when they are ready to walk through it. The moment came 6 weeks later. It was a weeknight, and Cecile called me at 9:30, which was unusual. She did not say hello the way she normally did. She said, "Mom." Just that. One word. And in that one word I heard my daughter again, the real one. The one who called me from a ditch in a snowstorm laughing. The one who cried the real ugly cry at her wedding. I said, "I'm here." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said Fletcher had come home that evening and accused her of something she had not done. I won't share the specifics because they belong to her, and when she had tried to explain, he had grabbed her arm hard enough to leave marks. It had never been physical before that. She sounded shocked, in the way you sound when something that has been building in the shadows finally steps into the light. I said, "Are you safe right now?" She said yes, he had left. He had gone to his brother's. I said, "Pack what matters. I'm coming." She started to say something about giving it time, about maybe she had misunderstood, about the mortgage and the dog and his work schedule and a trip they had planned. I let her say all of it, and then I said, "Cecile, I have been writing things down for 6 weeks. I have talked to Uncle David. I know exactly what we are going to do. All you have to do right now is pack a bag. Everything else, I have." She was quiet again. Then she said, "Okay." I drove to her that night. It took me 40 minutes. My husband wanted to come, and I told him I needed him to stay home and make up the guest room and make sure there was food in the house. He understood. When I got to her place, she had a bag by the door and she was sitting on the couch with the dog in her lap. She looked younger than I had seen her look in 2 years. Stripped down. Real. She looked up when I came in and she said, "I don't know how I got here." I sat beside her. I said, "I know. And we are going to talk about all of it. But first we are going to get in the car." She nodded. We left. What followed was not easy. I will not pretend it was. There were weeks when Cecile second-guessed herself, when she missed him or the idea of him, when she called me crying about things I could not fix with a phone call. There was a court process, which my nephew guided us through, step by step. Fletcher contested several things, which is what people like Fletcher do, because control does not let go without a fight. But we had documentation. We had photographs. We had records of the calls I had tracked. We had my nephew, who is very good at his job, and we had Cecile, who got steadier every week. Suzanne called me once, during all of this. She called to tell me I had overreacted. She said all marriages had difficulties. She said I had always been too close to my daughter. She said this in the same polished, smiling tone she used of the restaurant, and I listened to all of it without interrupting. And then I said, "Suzanne, I need you to understand something." I documented everything. I have a nephew who is a family law attorney, and I've spent 31 years learning when a situation requires intervention. This was one of those situations. I wish you well. And I ended the call. She did not call again. The divorce was finalized 8 months after that night I drove to Cecile's apartment. Fletcher moved back to wherever he had come from before Atlanta. The condo sold. Biscuit, the dog, stayed with Cecile because Fletcher had never actually been the one who fed him or walked him or took him to the vet, and the judge took note of that. Cecile moved to a smaller apartment closer to my house. She went back to therapy, which she had stopped during the marriage. She started calling me on Sundays again. The calls are long again. Last spring she started running. Just in the mornings, a few miles through the neighborhood near her place. She texted me a picture one morning of the sunrise from the trail, and I sat at my kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. She looked free. That is the word. Not happy, exactly, though she is getting there. Not healed, because that takes longer than a year. But free, like someone who had been holding their breath for a very long time and finally, was allowed to exhale. I think about the restaurant sometimes. That specific moment when she put the bread back. So small, so fast. And how many moments like that there must have been that I never saw, that she lived through alone, that she had already stopped questioning by the time I noticed. If you are watching this, and you recognize something in what I have described, not the dramatic moments, but the quiet ones, the way someone holds their face, the way they check before they laugh, the way they put the bread back, please say something. Not loudly, not in a way that closes the door, but say something, write things down. Know who you are going to call. And if you are the one putting the bread back, I want you to know that someone in your life is watching. Someone who loves you is keeping track. You do not have to figure out how you got there right now. You just have to make one call. What city are you watching from today, and what part of this story stayed with you? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. I have thought a lot about what made the difference in Cecile's story. Not the dramatic parts, not the night I drove to her apartment, not the court dates, not the phone call from Suzanne that I ended without raising my voice. Those were just actions. What made them possible was everything that came before them. Fletcher was not stupid, he was careful. He chose a woman who was warm and trusting and full of life, and then he worked quietly to make her doubt all three of those things. That kind of harm doesn't happen in one conversation. It happens across hundreds of small moments, each one just barely inside the line of what you could call acceptable. That's what made it so hard to name. That's what kept Cecile inside it long after her instincts were telling her something was wrong. But here is what I keep coming back to. The people who do this kind of thing are counting on silence. They are counting on no one writing things down. They are counting on the women around them being too polite, too uncertain, too afraid of being wrong to say anything out loud. Fletcher had built a version of Cecile who checked his face before she left. He had done it gradually, methodically, in the way that only works if everyone around them looks away. I didn't look away. And that, I think, is the whole of it. There's something I want to say about what I mean by that, because it isn't about being loud or confrontational or arriving at a dinner table ready for a fight. I was none of those things. What I was paying attention. What I was willing to trust what I saw even when no one else had named it yet. That takes a particular kind of steadiness, not stubbornness, but the willingness to sit with what you know and not let anyone talk you out of it, including yourself. I spent 31 years in schools watching what happened to children when adults around them decided that what they were seeing probably wasn't that bad. The cost of that hesitation is real. It is measurable. I learned early that doubt, in situations like this, tends to serve the person causing the harm far more than the person experiencing it. So when I saw Cecile put that bread back, I did not wonder if I was overreacting. I decided to pay closer attention. That is what I want to leave you with, not a dramatic gesture, not a confrontation, just the decision to pay closer attention, to write things down, to make the call you have been putting off because you're not sure yet. You don't have to be sure. You just have to be watching. Cecile runs in the mornings now. She sends me pictures of sunrises from the trail near her apartment. She called me last Sunday for almost 2 hours, and we talked about nothing in particular. And the whole time I could hear that she was just herself again. Loud, certain, taking up every inch of space she was given. That is what paying attention made possible. Not a rescue. A return. If someone in your life has gone quiet in a way that doesn't feel right, trust that feeling. You don't have to have all the answers before you act. You just have to decide that what you see matters, and that the person you love matters enough to be worth the discomfort of saying so.